going to have a live interview on front-end Angular, GIS, and Node. So we'll have a live interview with client on area of front-end Angular, Node, HTML5, CSS3, GIS, open layers. Okay, don't make noise. We'll share with you. Let me join.
Just admitting.
Hi.
Hi. Okay. Hello.
Hello. How are you?
Hello. Fine, thanks. Good. I'm Graham Wallace. I've been leading the interview. This is Audit. We'll be doing the detailed technical questions. So, are you okay for about an hour or so?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
Excellent. So we're going to be quite sort of specific. Given this is a 3-month contract, I mean, we might have scope to extend, but at the moment there isn't. So it's a 3-month contract. But the first, just to get started, just want to sort of understand what your current position is with core filing, whether you're still there or whether you're sort of actively looking or what.
Yeah, no, that project finished in November, so I'm actively looking.
Okay, that's all right. And you've given us a big list of sort of projects and assignments that you've worked on. What sort of aspects of the jobs that you tackle do you really enjoy?
So it's the front end, the mapping, the interactions like the open layer interactions, D3, the graphing tools and other stuff. So something which has a visual responsive design which works in mobile, phone, watch, and that's pretty much like creating a face for an organization. You can work a lot in backend, but working on UI and it just gives more life to the your boring work, right?
Oh, it's not boring.
I mean, okay, after a while, yeah. And yeah, it's not boring, but yeah, I think that's right. It's the preference everybody has. It like, and I've been doing backend for a long time, so so it's not that I don't know them, but it's just that by now I'm almost so a lot of things could be automated. So obviously geo server is a little different, but if it is a normal app like a banking app, I don't need to write the backend code anymore. I can just throw a JSON file and it regenerates all the microservices automatically. There's a live code generator, there's a JSON server, sorry. Just throw a JSON file and it all automatically create all get, put, set, every method. There are tools like GraphQL which can marry 10 different API and create an API dynamically by configuration. So the backend is more or less done and dusted. There are still AI and other stuff are coming up new, but traditional programming is all done and dusted actually.
Sort of, depending on whether you've got sort of configurable products or bespoke, and we tend to work on bespoke type solutions, so we still do quite a lot of coding ourselves. So when you sort of focus on the areas you enjoy, you talked about the open layer and talked about responsive layers, mobile and so on, interfaces. How would you go about building the answer to a GUI interface? What sort of areas would you focus on? What's important?
So basically we look into what's happening because especially when we are working with client, right? So one is obviously client feedback. So we take up the latest, again, even in front end, a lot of things already done, right? So if Facebook releases some new feature, right, this is already available as open source. And so whenever we come to a brand new project, we take what is already available as open source or available as a Angular material, because why record when it's already available? So we take them as a base, make our presentation, if it is with a UX guy, make our presentation and show to the client and let the client drive through. So we give a pretty nice framework, like, error free framework, like, less in screen interaction, less user, more usable, with less user to clicking, less typing, autofill everything, not autofill, don't even ask for information if it is not there, don't show error information. Like, why should even user be allowed to type error? Like, if it only accepts a number, just make it accept only number, right? You don't have to accept a string and then give, hey, you have done enter a string when it should be number, right? So prevent error from happening to begin with, so that and obviously you have to have help text as well, right? Because if you just have a box and user doesn't know whether to enter A or 1, and if he enter A and nothing happens, then it's what is the screen is broken or what? So yeah, you have to think about the user perspective. How does the user feel? Like, you have to put in yourself in the user shoe and see what would you feel if you don't get any feedback. So it's a constant feedback loop between how user will use your screen and the screen talking to you. It's still automated programming, right? But you have to think ahead, like, okay, if user type this, what will happen? If user type this, what will happen? So quite a bit of thought process goes through, make it usable,
Okay, so how far back in the process do you start? Do you start, for example, with a wireframe? Where would you start on producing
So it depends on client to client. So many client I have done from scratch. So I got a business goal, right? I want to improve the payment system. That's it, one line goal. And then we come up with all the screens and everything. How do we achieve that? Like, one of the vaguest requirement was like, Metrobank PSD2 requirement. It was one line. We have to implement the Euro standard called PSD2, which is open banking, right?
Yeah.
And nobody knew that time what does that entail, right? Then we came up with a screen like, hey, it means that users should be able to make payment from any bank to any vendor. So what has to be done to enable this process, like as a technical, like, so we look into the existing payment process and say, okay, these cannot be asked. So we looked at the existing what they had, improved the process. So sometimes it's from the scratch. Sometimes I do take a framework from the UX guys. Like, the UX is already made because the UX team has already done the job and we are given the UX. So in that case, we review the UX framework, and if there's any error or mistakes, like, or complication, we discuss with the UX team, maybe get it rectified. Like, sometimes, like, they have login screen. They have two yeah, go ahead.
So what happens if you haven't got a UX specification?
Then I make it, because that's the beauty of Angular. We can make UX like within because we have all the component library available as open source. We can quickly make the UX framework for the user, give the demo to the user. So we conduct user session. So we make a screen, like we got this payment screen, right? So we make all the screen lined up with how it should flow without the data, right? But Angular is a very robust framework. You can it will be as good as a real application. You can save the data in the browser, or you can even store in the session storage. You don't need an API, right? So you store the data, user get a feeling of how the application will look. They play around, we give a demo to the user, and we let the business and UX is a pretty finicky area. Like, some will say I like it left, or some will say I like it right, and and we let the user decide. Man, you both are here, you decide whether you want it right or left, so we let the user drive it and we go from there. If there's some feedback on the framework, right, we take a feedback like, hey, ABC to be improved, and then we just don't have another meeting, but we just ask that person to close it. So if that person because that way we'll avoid, because if you go again to the UX session, right, they will change something again. So every time you have a session, they will change something more,
Of course they will do. So let's say we haven't got a specification, but you've gone about creating sort of a wireframe using sort of either some downloads or some UX pre-can type stuff to get started, to try to pull out the requirements. What else do you need to think about in terms of what the front end should do for a customer?
So basically it's a goal, what we are trying to do. So say if it is a mapping API, right? So we are trying to do a mapping. So we will think what all user needs to do, make sure that the end-to-end process is covered from login to logout, right? What is we call it use case or user story, So make sure that the user stories are done, and how does the screen fit in to match those screen, and that's how. And we write the use cases, like we read the use cases, like, hey, this is the flow and how does that fit into the picture. So we carry on a couple of flows and make sure that we have screens or variation of the screen for implementing what the business requirement. It's at the end of the day, it's not that we are making a UI. We are trying to solve a humanity problem, right? Somebody is applying a credit card, right? Yeah, it's not that I want to give a fancy. I want the user to apply for a credit card with a minimum its amount of screen, as well as at the same time meeting the regulation like AML checks, KYC checks, whatever is required as a base what you call standard, it has to be done, as well as making it sure that the user get the least hindrance. Whatever could be done in the background could be done in the background.
Okay, so that's fine. So those are the sort of steps you go through, and there's quite a lot more that Andre will drill into. But what are the main issues that frustrate you when developing a new system or front end?
Yes, sometimes the requirements are not clear. Like, so they will say that they will have very vague requirement, like it should implement ABC rules, and then go and ask ABC rule. Nobody know what this ABC rules are, right? So sometimes there's a missing gap. They do mention it somewhere, but then the details are missing. And sometimes they say, oh, this is not documented, so that's the challenging part. So we sometimes have to dig deeper, and we do ask like, hey, we can do it that's a good thing about sprint planning is we could do it first without that, and later add when you know the requirement what needs to be done. But yeah, that's one of the things, like when they want something but they really don't know what they want. And I don't know what they want, so I cannot guess, and they are not agreeing to what I'm proposing, right? Because it's not matching, so that's I think a frustrating part, like so especially if it is going towards the end, we need nail down at least every sprint requirement should be done before the sprint, because we can't catch a running car, right? The car has to stop before we can catch. Sometimes we can catch, but it's difficult to catch a running car.
Okay. So what I'll do is just run through what we are looking for and describe the sort of solution that we are trying to create. We have about 6 different products, each of which have got their own set of interfaces, but which sit on a common sort of platform or piece of bespoke in-house software. And feeding into this piece of software is the various databases that are needed to support the front end. So what effectively we've got is 6 instances or 6 sets of visible sort of outputs, all based around one common piece of software, but we have lots and lots of sort of data feeds in for each instance. What we're looking to do is one common interface or dashboard across the top of 6 different use cases. I don't know whether you've come across one of those before.
Yeah, I have, like we come with like merge client is like it's a which runs port, right? They run 90 ports, and every port is different, right? But they are still same. It's a port is a port, right? But they are still having different interface. So we did come up with a lot of variation. It's still the same, but it's still different. And what they had before we came into the picture, before Angular, they had 90 software. The vendors billing them 90 times to do the same exact thing, even though it was exact kind of thing, So what we came up with is a called configuration kind of thing, right? Instead of creating, as I said, we create a component list, like especially if it is UI. UI could be made data agnostic. Like it need not depend on data. Like you can just throw in like, sessionless data, right? It's just a UI. So you make list of components at 20, 30, 40, whatever you need, right? And all the 6 screen will be repurposed from those 40 components. So or in that case, a first set of screen, like what's a requirement requires say 20, 30 components, right? The second will require 20 of those existing components and 10 new. So that way our requirement development cost goes down drastically. So the first one, 100% you have to write. Second one, development time reduces by 80%. Third one by 90%. Fourth one is like literally they are done,
Not with our company, it doesn't. They're all quite complex and so on. I mean, there's some commonality.
Yeah. If there's new functionality, yes, you have to write the component again, right? If it is a new like if we are talking about mapping components and suddenly you're talking about animation, it's a new component. But say if you in future, if you have another requirement which uses that animation component, like a slider, or presenter, right? You could reuse them. There will certainly be new component always, right? If you use a new graphing tool, you have to write the graphing tool, right? There's nothing stopping it, right? But at least some of the framework component, the layout component, the authentication component, the boilerplate code, talking to services, the directive, securities, there's still a lot of common code, even in a completely different looking UI system.
Okay, that gives you sort of a framework to work with. I could drill into the various use cases and how you establish them and so on, but I want to give Andre time to focus on sort of asking you some technical questions.
Sure.
So over to Andre.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. What about you?
Okay, perfect. I can hear you, that's fine. I'm Andre, I'm an engineer from the company, and I'll just run through some technical questions. Okay, first one would be, are you familiar with Angular?
Yes.
And what's the level of familiarity?
So I am very much like I've used Angular from version 1 to version 9. So I'm pretty much knows literally every feature of Angular. Not every, it's still a very vast feature, but most of the features I've used in Angular in quite a big context, mapping API to just data oriented to heavy loading like millions of recorded data. So yep, I've used Angular in various permutation, combination, configuration mode, B-scope applications. So yeah.
Okay, can you please describe some Angular class decorators?
Angular class decorator?
Yeah, for example, component.
Yeah. So Angular, you can say there's a couple of parts, right? One is called component, which you talked about, which is everything. Like whenever you write anything, it's a component. The second class could be service, which is kind of reusable code which you want to share across the component. The third could be classified as a directive, which changes how the look and feel. You want to loop through something or some custom ways. There could be a filter piping. There's a pipe, to format data in a certain way. That's pretty much, and the service is already covered, and there's a redux pattern as well, which is like if you want to share data across a big application, you could use a redux pattern. You could always use session storage, local storage as well to share data, but redux gives you without using any of the browser independent solution.
Okay, yeah, perfect. Can you name some of the security best practices in Angular?
Yeah, so
let's say go on.
Yeah, so security best first is you need to, if it is authenticated application, you should only give access if that role require that access. So basically minimum, don't show anything. So let's start with the blank page, right? Here's the application, you don't see anything, but that's how security starts. So then you think what this guy need to see. If say it's admin, like the screen could have administration screen as well as payment administrator as well as making a payment, right? So payment administrator will not be visible to anybody, and then you say hey, the payment. So you should need to have a role-based kind of authorization. Authentication could be via token or where could be single sign-on with JAuth, whatever you like. Like you could use Twitter login, Facebook, whatever is your choice. Your own custom login or your company LDAP or Active Directory. You could use anything you like to do, and we do it with a token. Right, every header we pass a token. We could use the old way of session as well, so that is also supported. So that's first of all is identifying who you are. Second thing is cross-site scripting. So you should avoid doing cross-site loading. Like if you want to talk to Twitter API, your server, you should write a proxy in your backend to do that for you, rather than letting browser go to everywhere and importing data from, because that opens up a security hole. Because if you're talking to on the dynamic, on the fly to 10 different server, any of them could be hacked, because if Twitter gets hacked, whereas if you are backend, you could still be able to control certain aspect to it. Second is like audit log. So you basically do a tracking of your application, who using a site and when. Right, so that you can see a pattern. If you are seeing any unusual pattern, you either block the request, and you will use some of the standard product like Angular. because most of the security, like cross-sighting, escaping, is automatically done by Angular. Because the problem we had talked about, most of the security vulnerability is already known to Google, and they have already solved in one of these framework. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And that follows the next question. How would you use user input in Angular to ensure that everything is secure?
Yeah, so we use HTTPS mode, which is nothing to do with Angular, but it's just how you set up your server. So one is that all communication between server and browser is by a secured mode, HTTPS, and that when user enters something, if it is sensitive information like a password, we use a password field which doesn't show to the user, right? And there could be certain, well, before you transmit it, it could be encrypted as well. Suppose you have criticality of a data, so some data could be encrypted before even sending to server as well, like the double layer of. So apart from HTTPS, some very sensitive information are further encrypted, which, so there are many ways to do it. Depends on the level of requirement. I worked for Citibank, like a security. I created a security application. So there's an N level of thing possible. There's a called double authentication, triple authentication, where you could need to. So if you do some secure like transaction, like £1 million transaction, right? You need to enter a token. Like suppose you did $1 billion transaction, you need to enter a token, and somebody manually has to even approve it. So it's like a 4-based authentication. Authentication token, it goes to queue of some manager who again does the exact same thing. So it's like, depending on a level of security, and you could choose the level.
Yeah, but what about inputs, as in actual input fields? So how do you stop and actually take care of the user's input to not, let's say, put a script into your input?
Yeah, as I said, like if yeah, exactly. So as I said, if we input accept only number, let it accept only number. Any other character is immediately deleted. So if you type, if it is number ABC, you can 1 to 3. You can only type 1 to 3. If you type at, it will be deleted. If you type anything special apart from number, so only accept the character which you want to accept.
Yes, exactly. So how do you know the name of the technique in Angular that does this?
No,
or
we
the
just
type of form that actually sanitizes the data.
No, we just do it exactly. I know there could be something out of the box, but we do it manually actually. So every field we made an input box, like we made a number input, we make a letter input. So we make a list of components, and those specialized component will only accept those particular parameters. Suppose we need a component with only 2 digits of number, we will make a component which only accept 2 digits of component. So it's basically a custom solution. You could use out of the box classes of material, but I think especially for secure application, we tend up the writing our own customized component, which just tackle the situation like 2 character, 3 character, 5 character, or suppose it's a date, it will only accept a date.
Yeah, so the actual component in Angular that sanitizes everything automatically is called reactive form component.
Okay.
That one does exactly what you told. You could say number, but it also takes care of the data sanitization, to not have a script there, to not have code in the actual field, and that's automatically managed by Angular out of the box. You don't need to write any extensive logic on it.
Problem is like if you want just 4 character, it doesn't give you anything. Suppose you want only dot to 00. So when you start coding, you will find 100 situations where out of the box code doesn't match. I know what you're talking about. Like most of the cases we start with that cases, and then we come with a custom solution. Oh, we need a currency. Currency can only accept 2 digit .00, and that's exactly, you cannot type .000. So that's the level we are talking about. And you're right, we can do the reactive form way. In fact, if you use reactive form, you don't even need to code. You can just do a configuration. Reactive form is a configurable model. You can just drop a JSON file and it will create the form for you automatically with all the validation. Automatically.
Exactly. But besides this, the reactive forms also let you write your own validators, which is what you said. Just two numbers, or in our case, the most frequent one is GeoJSONs, in which you only accept GeoJSONs, and if you write a validator, you can validate the data after it has been sanitized. Okay, can you please describe the data direction in Angular, the types of bindings?
So one is read only, like so you with Angular notation, so you basically dump out data to the screen. One is like the Angular where you are interacting with each other, like you're getting feedback and output from it. It's a two-way street, and yeah, pretty though. And there are other like a event binding. You could have some event like click binding with again with a score, that kind of binding. So that could be the third one. What else is there? So yeah, and pretty much, and you can actually pass in data. So the component could inject more component and then pass in properties, right, which then takes the data from parent, and similarly the child can throw event up like that. But it pretty much follow those three patterns actually, like read only, event, and
Yeah, from parent, child, parent, and then it's the two-way. Okay. Can you please tell me what's the difference between a pure and impure pipe?
Yeah, so in pure and pure one, which I think it's about data purity, means whether it touches the file or not. I don't exactly recall what it means, Misa.
Okay. So a pure type is when a pure pipe is actually triggered when you change something in the form. That's one of it. The other one is impure pipe is when Angular does its actual check.
Okay.
So it actually checks automatically for any change in the entire component. That's an impure pipe.
Okay.
Okay. Can you please describe 3 ways of alignment in CSS?
Means so you can have what kind of like a responsive design alignment? Okay, left align, right align. You're talking about?
Yes, exactly. So left, right, center. There's
V align, vertically you could do it.
So.
You could do a flex box. There's a lot of options available now. CS3 is very, very mature. There's infinite possibility. You can do literally anything you want now in CSS3. Like, you could have a box with the box, so yeah, it's a lot of possibility. You can make a spam behave like a div. You can make div behave like a span. Block, and there's a flex grid box layout is there. There's a lot of things. CSS3 is very, very vast actually.
Okay. Can you think of another way of putting data in the page and aligning it without flexbox?
You aligning to where? Left or right?
Left, right. Let's say you want to have 3 components. One should be in the upper left corner. One should be in the upper right corner. How would you do it without using flexbox?
Yeah, just use div, right, and float variable, like 3 things, right?
Float.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, that's a valid one. Are you familiar with Typescript?
Yeah.
Perfect. Can you please describe Typescript Generics?
Yeah, so basically Typescript Generics is built-in types which probably Angular supports. So when you import those type, right, you could, when you typecast, it will try to verify those TypeScript with that, I guess so.
That's the primitive type. Generics, let me give you a hint. Let's say you have a function and you want the function to work with different types of data. How would you do it in Angular?
So you will declare, you will declare your own type. So you will declare your own interface and and use that. So it is a custom type. It's not generic, but
exactly.
So you tell. So that's what Typescript, the language, is all about. When you give a type, like it will type check it. Like suppose it's an array. You can give an array, so to check for. But then you can say what kind of array is that? Is object, and then you can even define the object, what kind of object it is, and then it will make sure that it will. And then you can say it is optional, compulsory. You can make it integer. So that's what the whole TypeScript thing is typed. It's strongly typed.
Yeah. A good example is if you have an interface and you don't know the actual types of data you'll work with in the interface, but you know that you really want a particular function with all of the components. So then in the interface you could actually make a generic function that takes a type T. You don't know the type, and then when you implement the interface, you actually tell it, this is type number. It's array of floats, or whatever type you need. Okay. Can you please describe the difference between an observable, a promise, and a callback?
observable, promise, and a callback, right?
Yes.
Okay, so observable is, I think one of them is like it's kind of HTTP get, like when you're